with stuff and we wouldn't be able to tell. And that's just a fact of the matter. And then finally, there's just one more I want to talk about. What's a fourth reason? If you do something morally wrong in this classroom, mildly morally wrong, say, assuming that none of you have brought like firearms or something really terrible to class, the worst thing that can happen is what? If you do something like mildly morally wrong. Yeah, you get kicked out, but like you're not going to be able, unless you physically attack someone in this room, or say like say on your say you decide to cheat on a test. The worst that happens is your grade goes away. It affects your downs, like or say you cut a corner and you don't fill out your homework fully. You do half of it. You do half the reading. What's the worst that happens if you do half the reading?
You figure out what happened in class.
You figured out what happens in class. Your teacher or your other students might judge you mildly. It might affect your grade in the long run, but that's the worst that's going to happen. If I'm a doctor and I do a half-assed job, what happens? A person dies. The difference between, like, we all love our grades, we all like to have them high, but at the end of the day, getting an A is not as important as being alive. And if you're a doctor or a lawyer, if you're a lawyer and you screw up, what happens? Somebody goes to prison who shouldn't, or somebody who should be in prison goes free. That's the sort of thing. The stakes are much higher with professionals.
Yeah, I think the point is that there's not distinctive ethics for punishment.
Yeah, so one thing is, in like our everyday lives, there's not this really distinct sort of thing of just like there's general rules, but then very often, like when the stakes get higher, you need special rules. So like, if you're walking down the street, how closely are you looking down at your feet? If you're walking on a tightrope over a gorge, how closely are you looking at your feet? Same activity, but why are you being much more careful?
Because you don't want to like trip over.
Because if you trip on the sidewalk, it's mildly unpleasant and you like bruise your knee and get a scrape. If you trip walking across a bridge or a tightrope over a thing, you die. So you are spending a lot more attention. In the same way, when professionals make mistakes, people die. And that's why we need a special ethics. It's just, you can't just get away with regular ethics when the stakes get high. So, super high stakes. So, when hedge fund managers and banks did unethical things, what happened? The economy crashed. The economy crashed because people were selling subprime mortgages and convincing people to buy things which were bad investments to such a degree that the entire economy went upside down. Stakes were higher. If you badly invest your money, you might, affect your family and those you love, which is very bad, but you're not going to cause the economy of the United States to hit a recession. If you are somebody in a field with that much power, you can. No.
Yeah, that's why I think what makes it interesting is there's some professions that these don't apply to at all, but then there's some professions where it's you have to really take this into consideration extremely because you're saying,
And so here's the thing, is generally because they require expertise and they deal with very intricate things, the stakes are generally going to be higher. Now that's not always true. Like a professional chess player has a level of expertise that the average person doesn't have, but the stakes aren't necessarily higher for society as a whole. But in general, doctors, lawyers, etc., these people, we need to hold them to a higher standard because the stakes are so high. They're operating in these situations in which they're not going to be able to think out all the consequences of their actions. They're going to need to ask other experts because things are getting so complex. And the only other people who are going to be qualified to judge them are other professionals. So we need this specialized fields in order to make sure that when stakes get high and you need a lot of knowledge to decide what to do, the people who are there to judge them are qualified to judge whether people are behaving well and poorly. So that's why professional ethics is a thing. Everyone on board with just general. Why on earth are we talking about this in this class? Name another profession which isn't on this list, which is in some way relevant to this class. Cybersecurity is one.
Anything in IT.
anything in IT. How many of you code? How many of you, if I gave you some Python, like simple Python, could figure out what on earth it means and whether it was done well or poorly?
I feel computer science.
Okay, so we have a few people who don't. I will tell you right now, if you gave me like 5 lines of Python script, I'd have no idea what it was doing. Like none whatsoever. Therefore, you all who do have a level of expertise that I don't. And the more you do, if you've become an IT professional of any sort, anybody in computing, you have a level of expertise that nobody else who isn't very knowledgeable about the field has. Which means that you are somebody who's in a position to tell when somebody's doing something well. You are somebody who's in a position to tell when the stakes get high, whether corners are being cut. The average person cannot tell, looking at code, what it means. Somebody in the field can tell, and can tell whether somebody who made this was doing something right or wrong, or how this could be used, or whether the person who designed this code had some sort of malicious intention of leaving a back door in it. I would have no idea. Unless you literally took a door and said, this is in your code, I would not know what on earth is happening. You did.
Okay, especially people who work at cybersecurity fields, they have like a lot of experience that ITs don't.
Yeah, who are you going to hire to keep your computer safe? Somebody who's been working in programming, or like your dad, unless he works in programming. But like, how about grandma? Are you going to hire grandma to keep your new server safe? No, because grandma has no idea what she's doing. You need a professional. And you need somebody who's been doing it for years and understands the ins and outs. And when I say the stakes are high, what's an example of stakes being high? Like, we think of computers of, oh, you got a virus. That's kind of a pain. But the stakes nowadays are so much higher. Mel.
When I was reading the reading, that kind of struck me as crazy. Like, they said that a U.S. Navy computer system went off and it took out a Iranian flight and 290 people died.
Yeah, and this one was like 25 years ago, maybe? I can't remember the exact date. But we're talking like decades ago. This was 20 years ago. A computer went wrong, missiles fired, and shot down an airline. That was a software bug leading to a plane going down. 25 years ago, how much of the world was computerized? Some, not a lot. Nowadays, how much of the world is computerized? All of the world is computerized. So if there are software bugs now, the number of things which have the potential to go down, or if they are not kept secure to be attacked, is so high. And not only, and we're not talking just things like your personal computer. Think about all the things that you experience in your life which are run by computers these days. And think about all the things that can go wrong if something went wrong with those computer systems. For instance, what runs the backup on what's a nuclear power reactor? What does it do? It creates power. How? By literally splitting atoms apart, or fissure, yeah. You split atoms apart. What happens after you do this? You end up with a whole bunch of nuclear waste left over, and you have to keep things in very specific temperatures and under very controlled conditions, or else you end up with a nuclear disaster. What happens in a nuclear disaster? You get so much radiation in the area, everyone dies and gets mutated. Well, not fully mutated, but people die, and you cannot live there. And what's in charge of making sure our nuclear reactors don't melt down? Computers. Somebody designed the program to make sure that this works. The stakes are so high now, nuclear power is run off of computers. What's in charge of targeting on most missile systems? Computers. What's in charge of making sure that the traffic lights, just imagine like a simple case, imagine if somebody broke into the traffic lights and just made them all green at once. That would be utter chaos. And also something I stole from, what was that? The Italian Job?
It is the Italian Job.
Yeah.
2003.
So yeah, if you turned all the traffic lights, that would be utter chaos. And that's just flipping some switches. And that's just traffic lights.
Yeah.
So when we're dealing with this sort of thing, the stakes are way higher than they were even 10, 5, 2 years ago. Or imagine if somebody discovered there's just one back door in the iPhone. If somebody discovers that they can access the iPhone without actually having it be their iPhone. Think about how many of us would have our identities compromised, because our iPhone is literally our lives. Like, think about how much of your life, how much if somebody got a hold of your iPhone who you did not want to get a hold of your iPhone, how much information and power over you they now have. That's why, and who's going to be able to tell whether that's there? A professional. I cannot, your grandmother cannot, you all who know how to code will one day, hopefully, if you're interested, become good enough. And there are cybersecurity experts out there who would be able to tell these things.
And also international cyber terrorism.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah, and here's it's not just going to be somebody who you personally know. There's a lot of things on your phone which if I were a cyber terrorist, would love to have access to, like your bank account. That would be. How many of you do banking on your phone every once in a while, or have deposited checks? Yeah. Think about if it turned out that there was a backdoor into your phone that would allow somebody to access your Citibank or your Chase. Buy money. That's high stakes, because we're not just talking about you. If there's this, everyone who uses that program is online. Okay, so that's what professional ethics is, and that's why we're talking about it in this class. So now the obvious question is, so how do you keep professionals ethical? If we want professional ethics, what does that mean practically? How do we make sure that there are steps in place to make sure that doctors and lawyers and accountants and computer professionals are behaving well?
Ask yourself, like, you're just like, oh, am I doing this the right way, or do I need to like improve more of what I'm doing?
And in the case of computing, this is actually a very important one, which is part of the purpose of this class, is a lot of the time, in certain sorts of fields, especially newer fields, especially when they're very important to society and they haven't been around long enough for the average person in the population to understand, the only person who's going to keep a professional ethical is sometimes that professional themselves. And so there's especially in a field like computer science, which is new and there aren't a lot of other systems in place, sometimes it's just a matter of keeping self in line / making sure you're behaving well. Now, if this is the only thing in place, what's the problem? If the only way we made sure that computer professionals, the only thing which kept doctors from behaving poorly was the doctor had to, believe in themselves. And they just had to be okay with it. What's the obvious problem here?
They're gonna self-serve.
Yeah, there are people out there who, some doctors will behave exactly how actual doctors behave. And other doctors will do lots of things which we would not want a doctor doing. Like conducting experiments on babies. There's some doctor out there who just really is interested in how babies work and just starts cutting them up. And if you ever want to know about some of the horrible stuff which doctors have done when there's no oversight, you can read about some of the doctors in Nazi Germany and some of the experiments that were performed. If you ever really just want to feel bad about the human race, I recommend that. So part of it is you need people to look out for themselves, but not everyone is going to make sure that they're behaving well. So you want other things in place too. And what are some of the other things?
Rules and regulations.
Yeah, so rules and regulations, and what sorts of rules and regulations?
Codes of conduct.
Yeah, so part of it is codes of conduct. And what is the code of conduct? Any takers? And we're going to come back to this one a lot more. Just generally, what are we talking about with codes of conduct? How many of you have signed a code of conduct? No, you all have. You came to a school in which I'm almost certain you had to sign one to get here. It's just that, you know that thing where the first week of school or the first week on the job, they send you an 80-page PDF and say, read this and then sign, and everyone flips to the last page and signs? That's the code of conduct. You've all signed a code of conduct. I don't know if any of us have ever read a code of conduct from front to back. Probably not, but that's what they are. What are some other things that we have in place to make sure that people behave well? We said rules and regulations, so what are some other ones? Like just generally in a society as a whole? What's another type of rule we have? Usually it ends up with somebody hitting a hammer on a table. Yeah, laws are another one. So another way that we regulate and make sure that people behave well is there are just laws in general, sometimes laws specifically for certain fields. There are certain things you're not allowed, like if you're in the United States and you work for the CIA, there are things which you are legally not allowed to do. Like, talk about the CIA at dinner. And be like, oh yeah, my favorite secret agent so-and-so, here's their picture. They're hanging out undercover in Zimbabwe right now. We should give them a call. Like, you're not allowed to do that. It's illegal. It would be treasonous.
Common sense.
So yeah, common sense is kind of tied in with one, but there are also some more like explicit things. So, if a doctor starts behaving poorly, well, before a doctor can become a doctor, what do they have to do? And be allowed to practice on their own. They have to go to school, and then they have to do a residency, and then what do they have to do? Anyone know?
Exams?
Yeah, they have to pass a big test that the American Medical Association says, you're not allowed to practice medicine. And if you don't pass that test, you aren't allowed to. Same thing with law. Even if you get through all of law school, and you have the best internships, you still have to pass, I never remember which ones, oh, I think
LSAT.
no, that's to get in.
The bar.
The bar, there we go. Bar is
yeah.
lawyers, boards are doctors.
Yeah.
In both cases, if you failed, you are not allowed to practice. So, testing / certification. And it's not, in a lot of these professions, it's not like a driving test where you pass it at 16 and then you're good for life. It's every few years you have to re-up. Because, you know, I also don't know why we don't have to re-up our driving licenses, which is a very strange thing. It's like, I was able to drive very well 50 years ago, so therefore I'm qualified to drive now. Always seemed a little weird to me.
I was under the impression that you
No, not really. In most states, it's just like once you have your driver's license, you are good for life. Unless you get like a drunk driving charge or you just start crashing all the time, they might take it away. But unless you actively do something very bad, you're basically set for life. Maybe also there might be things where if like your doctor starts telling like, oh, you are literally going blind, they might be like, okay, now you need to go to the driving place and get your eyes checked. But generally, you're good to go. 16-year-old me was a very different person than me today, and like the fact that 16-year-old me was allowed to drive is first off horrible and terrifying, and the fact that any 16-year-olds are allowed to drive is horrible and terrifying. And the fact is that once you're good to go, you're good to go. But with professions, you have to keep getting certified. And what happens if you make a big mistake? If you're a doctor, and you make not just like a honest, everyday doctors make mistakes because they're people sorts of mistakes, but you start doing questionable things or cutting corners, what's going to happen to you?
You lose your license.
Yeah, you lose your license to practice, and you are no longer allowed to be a doctor. So, you can, and who decides whether or not you're doing something good or bad? Yeah, a board of professionals. So there's a certification, and then there's a governing board. Okay, that's a governing board. And they're in charge of making sure that the people who are continuing to practice are allowed. And once you start doing questionable things, you get your license taken away. How many people are familiar with Dr. Bum Bum? Has anyone heard of Dr. Bum Bum? Does anyone know what type of medicine he practiced based on his name?
I'm guessing he does surgery?
Yeah, what type of surgery?
Plastic surgery?
Plastic surgery, specifically, what type?
Brazilian
butt lift surgery. He was practicing Brazilian butt lift surgery in his living room. What happened? Somebody died. Because he had lost his medical license and continued practicing, and he was giving people bad butt lifts, which led to infections and people died. And then he went on the run and he was finally tracked down by Interpol. So Dr. Bum Bum is somebody who, the reason why we have governing boards and testing is so you don't have a lot of doctors like Dr. Bum Bum, whose main claim to fame was killing people and having a ton of Instagram followers. I'm pretty sure his handle was
Same for Dr. Miami.
Bum Bum. So yeah, these sorts of people are out there, and the reason why you have laws, and the reason you have testing and certification, and the reason you have a governing body is to make sure that these people cannot continue practicing. And the other reason you have this is now so the average person can look and go, oh, that person isn't certified, I really should not go to that doctor anymore. And so it's all built into society to make sure that people who are professionals are held to that higher standard, are judged by other people who know whether or not they are behaving well, and that they are therefore behaving in ways where we can trust that when you go to the doctor, that doctor knows what they're doing, and it's not just like somebody in a white lab coat saying, yeah, I know what I'm doing. So that's the whole idea here of how you keep people ethical in a profession. Which ones was I just talking about the most is doctors. Medicine has been around for a long time. in varying degrees of quality, but we've been chopping each other apart to try to make each other better for thousands of years. We have a lot of experience, we have a lot of time. So, once we move over to computers though, once we move over to IT, which of these still exist? We said this one's here.
Sure.
Are there codes of conduct?
Maybe.
So this one is a yes, but. Laws. Are there laws governing computing? Yes and no. Here's another yes, but. There are laws,
I
but
don't think so, though.
very often these laws were written hundreds of years ago. So the laws that are used to govern things like how Amazon sells packages and things are laws that were originally designed for bringing things across borders with horses. And like there's a very big difference between buying a streaming a video which is stored on a server in a different state from carrying a bunch of boxes of wheat to market with a horse. And yet the laws were applied to horses. So we do have laws, but again, it's a yes, but. So yes, there are laws, but what good is a law when it's not necessarily designed for the very thing that it's supposed to, or that it's now being applied to? What about testing and certification?
Definitely.